Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now. What's on your mind? A rough morning for Facebook. The social media giant suffering a worldwide blackout. Platforms, including Instagram and popular messaging service WhatsApp, down for hours. Back online this morning. What the social media giant says is behind it all, while also assuring no user data had been compromised. And this outage serving as a dramatic backdrop to a pivotal hearing today on the Hill with a Facebook whistleblower at the center of an alleged misinformation firestorm. Curbing catastrophe. The race is on this morning to contain the environmental damage caused by a massive oil spill off the Southern California coast. People urged to steer clear of the beaches, with wildlife washing ashore covered in crude. The cleanup effort as the sun rises and what we know about what caused the leak. Also this morning, on-call crisis. Medical centers across the U.S. are reporting an alarming uptick in violence against staffers. We'll take you to one Georgia hospital system where incidents have tripled compared to just 2 years ago. Plus, overnight sensation. Netflix's latest homepage home run comes to us in the form of Squid Game, the immensely popular Korean drama that's taking the world and social media by storm. We'll take a closer look at its rise to streaming supremacy, and we promise no spoilers. We really do promise, because I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet.
So
it's one more show to add to the long list of things everyone yells at me to watch.
This is one of those ones, though, where you're kind of annoyed that you can't contribute anything to a conversation because everybody's talking about it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We begin, though, on Capitol Hill, where this morning a Facebook whistleblower is scheduled to testify on the platform's effect on kids and what connection, if any, its apps may have played in the January 6th insurrection.
This all comes as the country hurtles toward a debt disaster. Democratic leaders in Congress are trying to stave off a potential economic meltdown by raising the debt ceiling. They're also struggling to unite the party around President Biden's economic agenda. There's a lot to dig into this morning, so let's get right to NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell. Leanne, good morning to you. So we've got the Facebook hearing and debt ceiling, but let's start with infrastructure. Progressive Democrats won their standoff with moderates by delaying that vote on the trillion-dollar bipartisan infrastructure bill until an agreement on that larger human infrastructure package could be reached. So what is the latest on those negotiations?
Good morning, Joe. It is definitely a busy day on Capitol Hill. Now, there's a pretty big development in these negotiations. President Biden had a meeting last night with members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And as you mentioned, fresh off their win in delaying a vote on the bipartisan bill, President Biden told them that he thinks the range that he can get Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to is not $3.5 trillion, but between $1.9 trillion and $2.2 trillion. The reason that's significant is because the progressives in that meeting said that they would come down from 3.5 and support President Biden in whatever number he's able to get. Another leading progressive in the Senate, Senator Bernie Sanders, he seems to also be softening his language a little bit. Let's listen.
We're going to negotiate. There's going to be give and take. But at the end of the day, my own view is that 3.5 is a conservative number. That, in fact, if we're going to effectively deal with climate, we probably have to do more.
Senator, would you be willing to go down to $2 trillion?
Senator Leader Schumer wants to see this done by.
Notice that Senator Sanders used the word negotiate, so progressives seem like they're going to be on board. Now the question is, where are Senators Joe and Manchin?
Leanne, we know you're watching quite a few other things on the Hill for us today, one of them being the debt ceiling. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has vowed that Republicans will not help Democrats raise it, which would mean they're going to need to use that reconciliation process, no matter the economic fallout they're saying. So walk us through the political calculations at play here. Do Democrats have any options here to go it alone? Is it just reconciliation, and are they happy about that?
Well, Democrats are going to try to push a vote tomorrow, and they're hoping that 10 Republicans join them. Now, President Biden has joined in on this debate and is trying to pressure Republicans as well. Let's listen to what he said.
So let's be clear. Not only are Republicans refusing to do their job, they're threatening to use their power, to prevent us from doing our job, saving the economy from a catastrophic event. I think, quite frankly, it's hypocritical, dangerous, and disgraceful.
I have seen no indication that there's going to be 10 Republicans who break with their party and break with Leader McConnell, who is insistent that they are not going to support raising the debt limit. Now, I will say one thing. While there have been debt limit votes in the past that have been partisan, this is unprecedented that the minority party, the Republicans, are actually blocking the Democrats, the majority party, from being able to hold a vote on this.
Yeah, all right, Leanne. So one more thing on Capitol Hill this morning. Facebook, it has been a rough week for the social media giant, and it's only Tuesday. We had that big outage yesterday. Now that whistleblower scheduled to testify at a hearing about protecting kids online. What should we expect?
It is going to be a bombshell testimony today. Frances Hogan is expected to say that Facebook knows that its practices are harmful, but it is choosing the profit of the company over the betterment of the country. In prepared testimony today that she's expected to read, she says that Facebook wants you to believe that the problems we're talking about are unsolvable. They want you to believe in false choices. And so it is going to be a very tough hearing for Facebook, since this whistleblower has come public and is working with legislators. All
right, Leanne Caldwell, busy day ahead. Thanks so much as always.
Thanks, Leanne. Now let's dig a little deeper into that Facebook hearing later this morning, which comes as the social media giant returns online following yesterday's outage. Whistleblower Frances Haugen is expected to say Facebook needs greater oversight after accusing the company of putting profit over the public good in an interview with 60 Minutes on Sunday. Take a listen.
The thing I saw at Facebook over and over again was there were conflicts of interest between what was good for the public and what was good for Facebook. And Facebook over and over again chose to optimize for its own interests, like making more money. The version of Facebook that exists today is tearing our societies apart and causing ethnic violence around the world.
Carol Cadwalladr is a Guardian journalist and the co-founder of Real Facebook Oversight Board. She joins us now. Carol, good morning. It's so great to have you with us. Thank you for your time. So first, let's just start with what you make of all this. You've been a vocal critic of Facebook. Are you surprised at all by the allegations made by Haugen in that interview?
No, I mean, I don't think any of us are really surprised, actually, by these allegations, in that I think critics have been saying very similar things for a very long time. But I do think that this is a game changer, because this is somebody who was actually inside the company and who can explain in detail how Facebook has misled us all. It's been misleading Congress, it's been misleading its investors, and it's been misleading users. And I think the sort of the rubber hits the road today, in that there is nowhere left for Facebook to hide. So I think it is a really big moment, and I'm certainly going to be watching very closely.
Absolutely. And Carol, I mean, you just put it so well. This is so riveting because it's someone who was in those rooms, who was privy to the decisions made. After that interview, after that information was disclosed, Facebook put out a statement saying this: we continue to make significant improvements to tackle the spread of misinformation and harmful content. To suggest we encourage bad content and do nothing is just not true. That was the second part of that screen that you're seeing there in front of you. So what do you make of the company's response? I mean, does it take responsibility? Does it address the accusations? What do you think?
I mean, I kind of think that they've got really nothing. They've got nothing left to say, almost. And that statement, that statement is categorically not true. And I think, that's what's so powerful about Frances Hogan's testimony, in that so much of this is solvable. I mean, that's one of the things she very powerfully says, in that it's profit. Profit is dictating these decisions. And that is what is so fascinating about what happened at the time of the election and before the insurrection. Facebook instituted these break glass measures. It turned off many of the most damaging aspects of the algorithm. But then when the election was over, it turned them back on again. And that was purely to do with profit motivation. And that we know, very directly led, precipitated, facilitated, boosted what happened in terms of the insurrection. So there is a direct responsibility there, and it comes down to money.
That's something that we'll hear more about later today in the Senate hearing. So looking to that Senate hearing, are you optimistic that Congress will take action on Facebook? What kind of measures would you like to see? What would make a difference here? What would make people safer?
I mean, there's sort of systemic changes which have to come. There is a whole raft of legislation that is required, and the question is, Congress failed to take the right steps in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We had that riveting moment when Mark Zuckerberg gave evidence to Congress, but nothing actually happened. No executive or board member was held to account. And the regulators, frankly, they failed in their jobs. The FTC failed. The SEC failed. Facebook got landed with a fine, but no explanations were ever given. No testimony was received. And actually, there's a really interesting court case at the moment, which is alleging that there is a massive cover-up, actually, in what happened after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And Facebook deliberately overpaid the FTC $4.9 billion just to save Mark Zuckerberg from giving evidence.
And Carol, before I let you go, I got to ask you about yesterday's global outage. What'd you make of that?
I mean, it was kind of so interesting, I think, for all of us, because it was sort of like oxygen got turned off, doesn't it? This idea that we have a choice with Facebook. Oh, we could use another product. Well, no. I mean, I think we all discovered that yesterday, didn't we, when we couldn't communicate to anybody via WhatsApp. I mean, this is absolutely critical infrastructure for large parts of the world. It is the internet. So, it was very sort of weird and interesting timing, but hopefully it's brought that message home to us, why this is so crucial to all of our lives.
Brought that message home and stemmed many memes yesterday. Carol Cadwallier, thank you so much for joining us on this important topic this morning. We appreciate your expertise. And we will bring you that testimony on Capitol Hill later this morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on NBC News Now.
Following breaking news, Johnson & Johnson has applied for emergency use authorization of its booster shot. If the FDA gives it the green light, it will be the second COVID vaccine to be authorized for a booster. Pfizer was authorized for a third dose last month. Johnson & Johnson says the booster for its single-dose vaccine provides 94% protection against symptomatic cases and 100% protection against severe cases of COVID. Here to help us understand the vaccines is Dr. Amish Adalja. He is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. So, doctor, let's start right there. What are doctors learning about the Johnson & Johnson booster? What do you think this rollout for that could look like?
We're learning that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is improved by adding a second dose. I think that's not surprising, but it took some time to actually get data to drive this and to drive this decision, because Johnson & Johnson had been a one-dose vaccine that people were really excited about, because one and done vaccine is really advantageous when you're trying to get vaccine into the arms of people that are hard to reach. But this data does show that with severe disease, a second dose of the vaccine does provide added protection, and I think that's important. What likely is going to happen now is the FDA's advisory committee is going to meet next week, I believe, I think on Friday or so, after they consider the Moderna booster decision-making process. So we'll probably see this roll out probably in the last half of October if everything goes according to schedule. And I think that this is something that people that have gotten the Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been eagerly awaiting, because they've kind of been in limbo for some time.
So overall right now, 56% of the U.S. is now fully vaccinated against COVID-19. But for the millions of Americans who got the Pfizer vaccine, some researchers say your immunity might be waning. Data published in the Lancet Medical Journal found the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine dropped over 6 months from 88% to 47%. Now, that's a major drop in the vaccine's effectiveness. We knew immunity was going to wane at some point. Did you expect this kind of drop after only 6 months?
If you remember back to the very beginning of this pandemic, and when we were starting to think about what efficacy number we wanted for a vaccine when it came to preventing symptomatic disease, it was 50%. We got really lucky, and I think very fortunate, that we saw these numbers above 90% for both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. But I think what's important to remember is even if you see this erosion against symptomatic disease, when it comes to what matters, serious disease, hospitalization, and death, the Pfizer vaccine does hold up really well. Even in that same study, that the numbers for hospitalization are extremely good. And I think that's important to remember. With these first-generation vaccines, our goal was never to create a force field around ourselves so that we never got infected, but to remove the ability of the virus to cause serious disease, hospitalization, and death. And by that standard, the vaccines are holding up really well. So I wouldn't be too alarmed about this number, because the other number on hospitalizations is much more important.
Yeah, and that is the key. It does show it does persist with hospitalizations over 6 months. Dr. Adalja, as always, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Now, there are still pockets of the country dealing with a high infection rate. That includes Des Moines, Iowa, where public school officials say they're seeing concerning COVID rates in the classroom. Now they're opening on-campus COVID testing sites to control the spread. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald joins us outside one of those testing sites in Des Moines. Megan, good morning. So first, just tell us, what's the COVID situation been like since the new school year started there in Iowa?
Savannah, good morning to you. I can tell you that there's a lot of concern among administrators across the Des Moines public school district here. They are seeing a higher infection rate among students than they saw last year. So right now we're told there's about some 115 students who have contracted COVID. They're home sick, another 100 that are in quarantine. But keep in mind that at the beginning of the school year, there was a ban on masks inside schools. Now, that's been temporarily paused by a federal judge. And the Des Moines public school superintendent says, you know, that has made a significant difference. Now that they're able to require these masks inside schools, they've already started to see a dip in infections. I wanted to listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
The mask mandate being struck down for the beginning of the school year caused a couple of problems for us. Our staff and our students and families did a phenomenal job last year when we returned to in-person instruction of following the mask mandate, as well as all of our other mitigation strategies. Having that change moving into this year just served to just make it more complicated to get people back into the mitigation groove.
Yeah, so it's an all-out race right now to try and make sure that they can keep these cases as low as possible as they head into winter. Of course, the concern there is that more people are going to be moving inside and that they could see another wave of infection. Savannah.
Yeah, Megan, let's not talk about those testing sites. There's been a greater demand there for testing. So how do they work for students and parents who need it? And are people coming and using them if they, say, present symptoms or something like that?
Right. So these testing sites just opened yesterday. And while they are open to the public, it's the students' family, as well as staff from the school that take priority. We're looking at two of these sites that are set up at two schools across Des Moines public schools. And this is really, we're seeing the school district sort of taking matters into their own hands. Back in July, the governor stopped the statewide testing, saying that they were seeing a low rate of people actually utilizing those testing sites and that the vaccine was widely available. But the concern here among many Iowans is that there's frustration. They're not able to find places to get tested, rather. And if they are, they're waiting upwards of 10 days to get those results back. So certainly a different scenario here at these testing facilities where people are coming steadily when they open up at 6 a.m. I want you to hear from one parent and how he appreciates what the school district is doing.
I have a 6-year-old, and she's too young to get the vaccine, so that's why we're here. Basically, my entire family's vaccinated, except we couldn't get her the vaccination. I just found about the clinic last week, and I didn't think we'd need it this soon, but I was glad the service was available.
Yeah, these sites are offering rapid and PCR tests with results available within 48 hours. Savannah.
All right, Megan Fitzgerald, thanks for being up early for us, and thank you for your reporting this morning.
A potential ecological disaster is brewing in California. Crews are racing to clean up crude left behind by a pipeline failure that sent at least 144,000 gallons of oil into the Pacific Ocean.
That's right, and coastal communities in Southern California are already seeing remnants wash ashore, with experts warning the crude could make it as far as Mexico. Crews are working around the clock to rescue as much marine life as possible. Many seabirds were left covered in petroleum, and fish are washing up as oil continues to invade delicate wetlands. California congressional leaders have sent a letter to President Biden requesting a major disaster declaration to free funds for the cleanup efforts. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer joins us now from Huntington Beach, California, with more on the oil spill. Miguel, good morning. What are you seeing there?
Well, Savannah and Joe, good morning. Overnight, the governor declared a state of emergency, and later on today, a flotilla of boats, as well as an army of people along the shore here, will be trying to collect the oil like the ones floating in the waters here just behind me. So far, authorities say about 3% of the spill has been collected. They also say they are watching here a slow-motion disaster.
This morning, miles of California coastline impacted by a major oil spill. Authorities now working desperately to minimize the damage.
This is just a devastating impact onto our coast.
Up to 144,000 gallons of crude may have poured into the Pacific, already coating waters, beaches, and some wildlife in thick oil. On typically pristine waters, bands of oil now scattered along 25 miles of Southern California coast. Beaches have closed, a fishing ban implemented. Residents advised to steer clear of the area and the ocean. It could be weeks, even months, before the long-term impact is known. Local officials trying desperately to save animals impacted by the spill.
A lot of people think, well, some fish and some birds, but it's far more extensive than that. This is very serious. It's catastrophic.
In some places, tar balls have already washed up on the sand. Crews using booms and skimmers to contain and remove the oil from the ocean surface, working against the clock to minimize the damage.
We're talking about a moving target.
That's right. I would actually call it several moving targets.
It's believed the leak occurred in a pipeline connecting a drilling platform to the shore. Divers are looking for the exact source of the rupture, about 4 miles off coast, more than 80 feet below the surface of the water.
We have examined more than 8,000 feet of pipe, and we have isolated one specific area of significant interest.
The company that owns the pipeline and officials say they're investigating the possibility a ship's anchor could be responsible for damaging the pipe, though no evidence of that has been presented yet. The incident has some lawmakers and environmentalists calling for an end to offshore drilling.
We've had the entire Orange County coastline potentially fouled by oil. If that is not a call to action for us to stop this practice, I don't know what would be.
Authorities will be in the air today trying to keep an eye on these oil sheens, which, as you guys mentioned, could move as far south as Mexico already. Authorities say they're also trying to prevent more oil from going into the bay, which is certainly going to be a difficult task here today. Guys, back to you.
All right, Miguel Almaguer. Miguel, thank you so much. Time for a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Which means it's time to say good morning to Bill Cairns. Hey, Bill.
Hey, good morning. So it's a soggy start in the southeast. Yesterday, the NASCAR race got rained out. They couldn't finish the race because of the heavy rain in areas of Alabama. Today, it's shifted now towards Atlanta and all through Georgia. So a big umbrella day, even a chance for some flash flooding. Airport delays almost certain in Atlanta, especially early today with all this heavy rain around. And this will continue as we go throughout the day. This storm system is very slow moving. 12 million people are impacted under flash flood watches, including much of the state of Alabama, northern half of Georgia, and then also through the Panhandle region of Florida. Rainfall totals by the time we're all said and done on Wednesday, widespread 1 to 2 inches, but those areas of maroon potentially up to about 3 inches of rain, maybe locally 4. And we'll have to watch the mountains of North Georgia. Of course, those areas are more flood prone. So for today, the forecast, other areas of interest, we got that wild card baseball game at Fenway with the Yankees. Tonight, it should be just fine, should be dry, but it will be a little bit on the cool side. Temperatures in the upper 50s, but not bad for October baseball. Middle of the country, still unusually warm. San Antonio's 90, but we're also going to have a few 90s likely in North Dakota later on this afternoon. That's pretty wild for this time of year. And still a chance of some showers and storms, Phoenix and Los Angeles, which doesn't happen all that often. So we'll keep that in mind. And then tomorrow's forecast, the Northeast clears out finally. The sunshine returns, but the rain remains from D.C. through the Carolinas into areas of Atlanta. So should be a fun night tonight. Yankees, Red Sox, Fenway, guys, and good weather for October.
It's good that they'll have the good weather. I know
Love the good weather.
Folks are excited about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
An explosive trove of documents dubbed the Pandora Papers claim that some world leaders, like Russian President Vladimir Putin, are hiding their wealth in offshore accounts.
And more than 600 journalists from 150 news organizations took part in these investigations. NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell has more.
In a leak of nearly 12 million confidential documents called the Pandora Papers, analyzed by 150 news organizations, including the Washington Post, heads of state and other major figures have deposited vast assets offshore to hide billions from tax authorities. NBC News has not been able to verify the documents. The president responding.
You said that you put fight against corruption in the core of your national security policy. So what is your reaction?
We're looking at that right now.
Why should people care about this trove of 12 million documents?
Means that the wealthy elite and those who can take advantage of this are paying less in taxes, if paying any taxes at all.
According to documents reviewed by the Post, an alleged former mistress of Vladimir Putin became the owner of a luxury apartment in Monaco, financed by Putin's inner circle of oligarchs and loyal banks. The Kremlin tonight brushing off the claims.
So the big concern for Americans should be, do we know who owns assets in the United States and what are they doing with that control?
The paper is also revealing Jordan's King Abdullah spent more than $106 million on luxury properties in Malibu, California, Washington, D.C., and other countries. The purchases are legal but embarrassing given Jordan's economic crisis. A Jordanian official tells NBC News the king is spending his own money, not public funds, or the millions his country receives in U.S. aid. I asked Secretary of State Blinken about it as he arrived in Paris. Do you have any reaction to the Pandora Papers, sir?
Nice to see you here.
And it's not only world leaders. Elton John, Ringo Starr, and Shakira are also named in the documents. Savannah and Joe.
All right. Wow, Andrea, thank you so much.
Let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi is with us from Tehran today. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, guys. Well, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is to hold sensitive talks today in Paris, but he's probably going to get a frosty reception from the French, who are still irate after Australia scrapped a multi-billion-dollar deal for French submarines, saying it would pursue U.S. nuclear versions instead. President Macron called the secret talks between the U.S. and Australia a stab in the back. Lars Vilks, the Swedish artist who drew controversial, disparaging cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, has died in a car crash. Vilks had been subject to multiple death threats. Al-Qaeda even put a $100,000 bounty on his head. According to police, Vilks was traveling in a car with 2 police protection officers when it was involved in an accident with a truck. And finally, a scrapped Air India plane, which had reportedly been sold off, was being transported when it got stuck under a bridge. The video has gone viral, and I assume the pilot has gone to get his eyes checked. And those are your headlines.
And measures in place to prevent that from happening. So, all right.
Nobody thought, let's check this height and that clearance.
We can get under there. All right. Thank you,
Thanks,
Ali. Now to the civil war in Ethiopia, where government forces are locked in an ongoing conflict with the rebellious region of Tigray. Both sides continue to amass troops in anticipation of more fighting. Sky News Africa correspondent John Sparks filed this report from inside the country.
We followed the road north through Ethiopia's highlands on the road that leads to Tigray. But the country's maps may need rewriting, for this pockmarked track leads to war. In the region of Amhara, everyone who is able is expected to fight, including middle and high school students who were called up last month. They've joined forces with the National Army in a fight to the death with the rebellious state of Tigray. The two sides massing their forces and trading blows on lands adjacent to the country's central highway.
There are thousands of troops in this area, close to the front. Men, women, many of them very young, and it looks like they are preparing for battle.
Abiy Ahmed Ali.
Further south, in the Ethiopian capital, the country's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, was sworn in for a new 5-year term. He took power as a progressive and award-winning peacemaker, but his premiership has been dogged by war with the party which runs Tigray, the TPLF. Abiy calls them cancer. Their political dispute has shaken the nation, and the evidence was all around. This TPLF tank was taken out by a drone, said these preoccupied Ethiopian soldiers. Our guides from a local militia then took us up a mountain to a village called Uruga and asked us to inspect the damage. The Tigrayans held this place for 3 or 4 days, they said, and incinerated its clinic and grain mill. A local farmer took us for a tour. Why do you think they did that? What do you want to happen to the TPLF? What do you want to happen to the people of Tigray? Most of the men here are prepared to fight, and we were led to the center of the village, where they sat under an olive tree, clutching their weapons. They call themselves Sharit Labashuch, a militia of sorts and a symbol of mass mobilization in Amhara. Their leader says they'll die for their nation and their land.
ኢትዮጵያን ዙሮ ዙሮ ለማፈራረስና አማራ ላይ ሂሳብ እናወራርዳል የሚለው ህልማቸውም ሆነ እቅዳቸው አልተሳካም። በአማራ ላይ ማንነት አማራ ማንነት አሳጥቶ አማራ ክልል ላይ ገብቶ ትግራይ ናት ይቺ ክልል አንድና ብሎ በመጻፍ የሚሆን አይደለም።
Human rights groups say atrocities have been committed on both sides in this conflict, although the TPLF has denied all allegations in places like Aruga. Most residents in the village managed to flee the attack, but there were some who were too old to run. An 80-year-old called Imam Tefera was shot at the door of his home, and we found his son standing at his father's grave.
ምንም ላስቆም አልቻልኩም። ያው ሽማግሌ ነው አይነኩትም ብዬ እናቴና ወንድሞችን ይዤ ሸሸሁኝ። ምነው ከሱ በፊት ለቅኔ ሞቼ በነበር ይሻለኝ ነበር።
Abdel Tefera told us he is ready to fight, the consequence of a civil war that has nothing to do with civility. John Sparks, Sky News in Amhara.
Hollywood's Backstage workers are overwhelmingly saying enough is enough. More than 98% of the International Association of Theatrical Stage Employees who cast ballots over the weekend voted to authorize a strike. Union members who work on big film and TV projects say they want better working hours, safer workplace conditions, and improved benefits. Now, talks between the union, IATSE, and major film production companies broke down 2 weeks ago, which prompted this vote. And if the group's requests are not met at the bargaining table, it could lead to the union's first nationwide strike in its 128-year history. So something to keep an eye on there, Savannah.
Absolutely. I've been seeing some of those posts on Instagram go viral with some of the stories that have been being shared there. All right. Thanks, Joe. Now, as the fight intensifies on Capitol Hill over President Biden's legislative agenda, families across the country are hoping one key item is included in the final spending plan, the child tax credit. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhl has the details.
Hey there, Joe and Savannah. President Biden is hitting the road this week in an attempt to explain to the American people exactly what's in his multi-trillion-dollar human infrastructure plan. At the same time, Democrats in Congress are negotiating what needs to be in this bill and what can stay on the cutting room floor. For Jennifer Dickman in North Carolina, it's a life-changing $500 a month.
Child tax credit money has really helped us with our medical expenses. I have 2 special needs kids.
The expanded payments that began in July as part of the American Rescue Plan impacted tens of millions of families immediately.
If my kids need this for schooling, I got it. If I need gas to take them to here and there, I got it.
That went to an air conditioner, which was so helpful. I was worried about my son becoming dehydrated.
I bought my son's school supplies. I bought pull-ups and wipes for my daughters.
But the payments expire at the end of this year unless Congress passes some version of the human infrastructure bill that is central to President Biden's economic agenda. Jhumpa Bhattacharya at the left-leaning Research Center Insight says it's needed more than ever.
What it will do is that it will help families who were already struggling economically before the pandemic. It will help them plug some holes.
At a time when the pandemic has exacerbated financial hardship for millions, but the 10 richest Americans are worth more than a combined $1 trillion, President Biden wants a massive increase of the social safety net. Democrats are negotiating over plans to extend the child tax credit, create free universal preschool, subsidize child care costs for young kids, and expand Medicare to cover dental, hearing, and vision.
I think what this bill is doing is it's showing that the government doesn't just care about the wealthy, it cares about the average American.
Democrats say the money for these programs would come in part from raising income and capital gains taxes on the wealthy and increasing taxes on corporations. Congressional Republicans stand opposed.
Wasting trillions and trillions of dollars on socialism would be a bad idea any day. But it's a uniquely bad idea at a time when American families are already being hammered by inflation and soaring costs.
But some parents who have seen the benefits of the child tax credit already can't imagine a world without it.
The child tax credit puts food on the table, and that's just an incredible thing. And how can we take that away?
Now, it's important to remember, $3.5 trillion is not all or bust, and Democrats are trying to figure out what is most important in this bill, while the White House has realized they need to spend more time and energy explaining to the American people what's in there, how it'll benefit their lives, and in turn, possibly have those people push their congressperson to vote yes.
All right, Stephanie, thank you so much.
A shocking new trend affecting healthcare workers has hospitals sounding the alarm.
That's right. The number of verbal and physical assaults against staff members has increased during the pandemic, a phenomenon contributing to an already pressing situation among doctors and nurses. According to a study published in the Workplace Health and Safety Journal, 44% of nurses reported an incident of physical violence and 68% reported verbal abuse.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows healthcare workers are also 5 times more likely to suffer from injury because of workplace violence compared to the overall workforce. Some employees say they've reached their limit and are now looking to lawmakers for support and protection against these growing threats. NBC News correspondent Cal Perry is outside Northeast Georgia Medical Center in Gainesville, Georgia, where workplace violence has tripled this year compared to just 2 years ago. So, Cal, that right there is an astounding number. We're seeing this issue all across the country. Do we know what's leading to this increase in violence against healthcare workers?
Well, it's certainly a disturbing trend, and it is getting worse. Those stats you read certainly bearing that out. And here, as you said, now 3 times worse. This is a problem that existed before the pandemic, but it seems to be a combination of things. It is, of course, the virus. It is, of course, this society that we live in that is very divided. But it is also progressively sort of deteriorating. Take a listen to what Dr. Dave told me yesterday. He works in the emergency room here.
It's absolutely gotten worse. This is a phenomenon that predates far before the pandemic began. It's certainly become worse over the last 18 months. Much of that is due to, as you are well aware, I mean, our resources are taxed, especially this most recent wave of COVID really taxed our healthcare system. We're seeing ICUs across the country, including here in the Southeast, that are just overwhelmed. We've had to create ICU capacity in this building. We've had to use tents to care for critically ill patients. That creates a lot of stress, not just for our healthcare workers, but also for patients and their families.
It is that extra little bit of taxing on those healthcare workers that is sort of the unimaginable thing, right, guys? They're already stressed. They're already working on those long shifts. They're already short-staffed, and now having to deal with sort of violence in the workplace.
Yeah, Cal, that's exactly what I want to ask you about, because we've obviously been talking about this burnout that healthcare workers are experiencing for months, even more than a year now. I mean, what kind of effect is the fact that they're already dealing with that? They are so overworked right now, and then they have this violence in their workplace. I mean, what's that doing to them? These people who have been on the front lines of the pandemic for us all.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Savannah, I talked to somebody yesterday who said, you know, her staff is taking off their badges before they go to the supermarket to shop at the end of the shift.
Wow.
And I found that sort of eminently heartbreaking, right? Because these are the frontline heroes that are serving America right now. Again, take a listen to what Dr. Dave told me.
They're exhausted. There's fewer and fewer people that feel that they can bear the risk to come to work. The risk of being exposed to COVID, the risk of, verbal, physical, sexual assault. Those are real risks to a lot of folks. And, healthcare in particular is heavily, involved. There are a lot of women in the healthcare workforce, and they're unfortunately at higher risk for a lot of these things, and as it relates to healthcare violence.
And so you have a real problem, guys, now recruiting healthcare workers to come and join the workforce at a time in which there's not only the pandemic, but things are so bad really across the country, guys.
So, Cal, all this begs the question, what can be done to protect healthcare workers from more violence?
Yeah, well, there's a little bit of good news here. So you have some legislation underway. The U.S. House of Representatives has already passed a bill that's going to clarify some of the laws. You have the state of Georgia seriously working on things here. Take a listen to what Kevin Madsen told me. He does security here. He's in charge of security and services. He's one of the executives here at the hospital. Take a listen.
When we have a patient or a visitor who has the propensity to be violent, that it is spreading that situational awareness. It's talking throughout the shift. It's checking in. How's this patient doing? Do they have any concerns? Can we intervene early on what their concerns are? And sometimes that's making exception to policy so that we can meet their needs, whatever those might be. We've had to increase our patrols, and as we have what we would call a high-risk admission or a patient who is exhibiting signs of being more violent, then those are times where we would increase staff.
And so you will see procedures change in hospitals around the country. I can tell you right now, guys, if you have been to a hospital in the last 6 months, one of the first people you'll meet at those doors is, unfortunately, these days, a security agent, guys.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Silvana Henao is with us this morning. Hey there, good morning.
Good morning. So Southwest is the latest U.S. airline to mandate employees be vaccinated. Workers must be fully vaccinated by December 8th, although they can seek a medical or religious exemption. Southwest says it has to mandate vaccines because of new rules from the Biden administration involving companies with federal contracts. Southwest carries mail for the U.S. Postal Service and flies the military in emergencies. Rent the Runway plans to go public, filing papers for an IPO. It joins a number of retailers looking to cash in on the record boom in the markets this year. Founded in 2009, Rent the Runway lets users rent clothes and shop for secondhand merchandise from more than 750 designer brands. The company reporting sales fell about 9% in the first half of this year. And teens are spending more now than they did in the spring, according to the latest Taking Stock with Teens survey from research firm Piper Sandler. Clothing is their top spending priority over food. Buying handbags, wearing makeup, and crypto trading are all on the rise, while spending on video games, movies, and personal care is falling. Nike is the top apparel and footwear brand, followed by American Eagle in clothes and Vans in footwear. Back to you.
Some of that was a throwback.
Yeah.
American Eagle.
Thank you, Savannah.
You got it.
All right, social media may have shut down for a bit yesterday, but Netflix stayed online. Good news for the millions of people devouring the hit show Squid Game.
Didn't include us quite yet, but we'll see. Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos says the 9-episode Korean thriller could become the streaming service's biggest non-English language show in the world. So what exactly is it, and why is it so popular? Joining us now is NBC News youth and internet culture reporter Callan Rosenblatt. Callan, good morning. All right, we just watched the trailer, so we have a little bit of a taste of what this is about. It looks freaky, so for people who don't know, explain what it's about and how it got so popular.
So Squid Game follows a group of adults who are indebted and desperate and find themselves in a competition where they have to play children's games in order to win a large amount of money. Now, the catch is if they lose, they die. So the stakes are very high and people are flocking to this show. It is unlike anything anyone has ever seen before. And the reason that it is so popular is it's so rare that we see like a unique property today that doesn't have a built-in fan base, that isn't based on a book or a movie or a comic book. And to see the aesthetics of this, it's so unique looking. Everything about it is drawing people in, and it's a big word of mouth show. Memes are being created, people are talking about it online, and it appeals to every demographic. So it's kind of the perfect storm for this to be one of the biggest Netflix shows ever.
In short, not a cooking show about making calamari. Is what I assumed at first, and it is not at all about that. All right, so let's talk about some of the pushback the show has gotten. One viral thread on Twitter says, if you don't understand Korean, you didn't really watch the same show. Translation was so bad. So how common is this reaction? Tell us more about it.
Well, there's some people who agree with that thread and some people who say it's overblown. There's one scene in particular that people are pointing to, and I promise this isn't a spoiler, but there's a line that essentially says, I'm not a genius, but I can figure things out. And the translation is closer to, I didn't go to school, but I'm very street smart. And so people are saying, for that character, you're missing context in that particular translation. However, a lot of people have said, translating as an art, it's not going to be a one-for-one perfect translation. And it does get the point across. You're not going to miss any major plot points because of the subtitles or the dubbing.
Thanks for the promise of no spoilers, because we did promise that at the top of the show, so that's great. And I don't want any, because I do want to watch it. Something else that I think is so interesting is Squid Game's, hard for me to say, creator reportedly wrote the show like a decade ago or so, but was rejected by a number of studios. Tell us about this moment for him and other foreign filmmakers. Do you think more platforms will invest in this diverse type of content going forward, especially with this popularity?
Yeah, so I spoke to Julia Alexander, who's an analyst for Parrot Analytics, and she studies this kind of thing. And she said that she would be shocked if we're not seeing more K-dramas coming to the United States, and that's Korean dramas. K-pop is huge in the United States. Parasite, which is a Korean film, won Best Picture at the Oscars. Korean media has already been enormous in the United States. And so if we don't see more K-dramas, we'd be really surprised. And we expect that Netflix, Hulu, other streaming services will begin investing in these properties as well.
Oh, Parasite was so good. Yeah. All right. Callan, thank you so much. That's a fun one. We'll let you know. We'll report back.
This morning, a story about dedication and a promise to shine a light on injustice. One man has trekked across the country, making it his duty to bring attention to some Americans whose loved ones say are forgotten.
That's right. Indigenous women missing or killed, whose cases have not been solved. As NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton shows us, he hopes his message will bring change and some closure to their families.
Dwayne Garvey Lawrence is on a mission in search of justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women.
The percentage of women, missing was unbelievable.
Biking and running across the country, finally making it to Washington, D.C. last week to meet with some of the nation's lawmakers to discuss dedicating more resources to finding missing Native women. More than 4 out of 5 Indigenous women experience violence in their lifetimes and are murdered at rates more than 10 times the national average.
Is this kind of journey what it takes to get attention on your cases?
If that's what it takes, then that's what we're doing.
Dwayne, a father of 5, met with families of the missing along the way. Paula Castro's 14-year-old daughter, Henny, went missing from the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in 2018 after playing basketball with friends.
How do you feel law enforcement handled your case?
I don't think they did. That's how I feel. We would keep calling them. We filled out missing person report there. Come to find out that it was just sitting on a desk.
The family organized their own volunteer search party. 2 weeks later, Henny's body was found with injuries to her face. Still, her death was ruled accidental. The lack of attention has left Henny's family heartbroken.
Like, she wasn't important enough. That's how it made me feel.
In D.C., Dwayne's wife and daughters traveled to join him.
What needs to change now?
We need more detectives. We need people to come up with programs and plans.
On Friday, Dwayne concluded his cross-country journey by running 3 miles around the National Mall, celebrating with drummers, dancers, and tribal leaders. For his family, this moment represents a turning point.
I believe that. I can feel it. I really can.
A prayer that missing and murdered Indigenous people's stories no longer go ignored. Antonia Hilton, NBC News.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.